Are we in the Matrix? No. Hi, I'm Keanu Reeves, here with BuzzFeed and answer some questions. Thank you.
The double doors of courtroom 17C creaked open and a hush swept through the gallery like a sudden gust. Keanu Charles, Oscar-nominated actor, former golden boy of the indie circuit, and long absent from public life, entered flanked by two federal marshals, his figure striking in a sharply tailored charcoal suit. The room held its collective breath. Outside, the courthouse steps had descended into chaos. Paparazzi jostled for position, camera shutters clicked in relentless rhythm, and live news crews offered feverish commentary. But inside, it was a different world. The Southern District of New York was no stranger to high-profile cases, yet something about today felt different. As Charles entered, the whispers surged. A journalist near the back muttered, "That's him." A juror adjusted their glasses. One woman in the public gallery covered her mouth, stunned. At the defense table sat Sean "Diddy" Combs, flanked by his high-profile attorneys Mark Agnifilo and Tenny Garagos. The mogul's typical swagger had visibly faded. He leaned forward slightly as Keanu Charles approached the stand, eyes fixed on him with an unreadable mixture of confusion, recognition, and perhaps, just briefly, fear. The two men locked eyes for only a second, but the tension crackled like static. Judge Arun Subramanian, presiding over what was quickly becoming the most sensational celebrity trial of the decade, gavelled the room back to order. "Let's maintain decorum." "You may proceed," he said, motioning toward the witness stand with a tone that cut through the whispers like a blade. Charles moved with calm deliberation, his eyes focused ahead. He didn't glance toward Diddy. He didn't glance at the gallery, not even when a sharp cough echoed or when someone dropped a pen in the quiet. He sat straight-backed, placing his hands firmly on the witness box as if anchoring himself to reality before opening the door to a hidden world. This wasn't just testimony. It was a reckoning. A man returning from exile to confront something no one in the room was truly prepared to face. The tension was so thick, even the wood-paneled walls seemed to lean in. Keanu Charles spoke slowly, his voice calm but with an unmistakable weight behind every word, as though each syllable pulled at a memory he'd spent years trying to bury. The courtroom leaned in, jurors, attorneys, even the stenographer. His eyes didn't waver as he turned toward the jury box. "I met Sean at what I was told was a wellness retreat in the Hollywood Hills," Charles said, his tone direct, firm. It was supposed to be a space for healing, reflection, a break from the madness of the industry. He described arriving at a sprawling, secluded estate, nestled behind high hedges and guarded gates. There were no logos, no paparazzi, no press, just luxury wrapped in silence. He was greeted with what he called disarming hospitality, lavender-scented air, herbal teas handed out by smiling staff, soft ambient music, and warm, grounding eye contact. The people there, they knew my name before I told them. They complimented my energy, my aura. It felt safe, like I'd finally found a place where I could breathe. He paused, glancing briefly toward the judge before continuing. But what began as a motivational seminar turned into something else, something darker, a psychological and spiritual ambush. The courtroom stirred. Murmurs rippled through the gallery again before being quickly silenced by another sharp rap of Judge Subramanian's gavel. Charles detailed the first 2 days: yoga at sunrise, group journaling, crystal therapy, and guided meditations. p.Diddy, known in those early hours simply as Sean, had positioned himself as a kind of spiritual advisor, offering nightly talks by the fire, speaking about ego death, legacy, and the burden of fame. He was magnetic, Charles admitted. He knew how to say just the right thing to make you feel like he understood every part of your pain, like he'd been where you were, like he could help you get through it. But then the tone shifted, the language changed, mantras turned into commands. Eye contact became surveillance, meals were replaced with fasting, conversations became confessions. "They called it alignment," Charles said, his voice lower now, locking eyes with the jury. But it was indoctrination. He described being told to relinquish personal items, phones, journals, even clothes, under the guise of shedding attachments. It was gradual, he said, almost surgical. By the time I realized something was wrong, I didn't recognize myself anymore. The courtroom remained frozen. Not a cough, not a stir, just the sound of a man pulling a sinister truth into the light. The room seemed to shrink as Keanu Charles leaned into the microphone, his voice lowering just enough to force the jury to listen more closely. Tension coiled in the air as he described what he called the most disturbing night of my life. His words painted a scene so bizarre, so surreal, that the courtroom teetered between disbelief and dread. It was the third night, Charles began. We were told to meet at the lower level of the estate. I remember the hallway, long, dark, lined with curtains instead of walls, and then we entered what looked like a chamber, candle lit, silent, hot. Gasps broke out across the gallery as Charles described the ritual that followed. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. They asked us to strip down and sit cross-legged in a steaming bath of red liquid, he said. There was no explanation, just instructions. We were told to chant our childhood nicknames over and over again in rhythm. He paused for a moment, swallowing hard. I thought it was some Hollywood joke, like one of those bizarre, over-the-top team-building experiences, until they locked the door. Judge Subramanian's eyes narrowed. The jury was motionless. One juror shifted uncomfortably in his seat, adjusting his collar. Prosecutor Emily Johnson leaned forward, pen poised but still, clearly focused on every word. Across the aisle, Diddy's attorneys, Mark Agnafilo and Tenny Garagos, were locked in a furious whisper, occasionally passing notes between them. Charles continued. It wasn't just the bath, it was the atmosphere, the silence, the weight in the air, like the room was watching us, like the ritual had a life of its own. When asked by prosecutor Maureen Comey how many people were involved, Charles didn't hesitate. Over 60, all celebrities, some you'd never believe. Big names, household names. He scanned the gallery, eyes heavy with implication. But I won't name them. Not yet. Judge Subramanian raised an eyebrow but did not interrupt. Charles then added a chilling detail. There were people documenting it, cameras hidden in the sconces, I think. And Diddy, Sean, he wasn't just watching. He was orchestrating, directing the whole thing like a conductor. For the first time that day, Diddy looked visibly shaken. He adjusted his collar, then leaned in to whisper something to Agnifilo, who nodded, lips pursed. Whatever this ritual was, it was clear to everyone in the room. The trial was no longer just about music or money. It was about power, ritualized, weaponized, and sealed in red. Keanu Charles sat rigid in the witness box, his hands clenched tightly, knuckles whitening under the pressure of his own memories. The courtroom remained silent, but charged, as if even the air had become reluctant to move. What followed next from Charles's mouth was unlike anything the Southern District of New York had ever heard in a federal trial. As if he were reading from some Gothic script, Charles said. He circled the perimeter of the room, slowly, deliberately, whispering phrases, things I couldn't understand. The jurors leaned forward, visibly disturbed. Some were in Latin, Charles continued, his voice catching, others in French, and some were just noise, nonsense syllables, but the tone, God, the tone was surgical, like he was cutting into us with every word. He paused, taking a breath as if he could still hear it. It felt like we were being reprogrammed. According to Charles, Diddy, barefoot and cloaked in what appeared to be a crimson robe, never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He would glide around the steam-filled chamber, placing his hand on our heads one by one. When he touched me, Charles said, voice cracking for the first time that morning, I remember everything just blurred. His hand was ice cold, but my body felt like it was burning. He described the moment Diddy laid his hand on his forehead. He whispered something in what I can only describe as tongues. I don't know if it was a real language. It didn't matter. It bypassed my ears and went straight into my chest. I felt paralyzed, like I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. At the prosecution's table, Maureen Comey scribbled feverishly into her legal pad, lips tight. Assistant U.S. Attorney Damian Williams didn't write a word. His eyes were locked on Diddy, observing every twitch, every breath. Diddy, for his part, appeared agitated now. His leg bounced under the table and he kept reaching for his water glass, though he rarely drank. His attorneys whispered on either side of him, but for once, he didn't respond. Charles continued, quieter now. We weren't people in that room. We were vessels, and he was pouring something into us, something we didn't understand and couldn't unlearn. The room remained spellbound. There were no objections, no laughter, no scoffs of disbelief, only a lingering sense that what they were hearing was no mere performance. It was a revelation of a secret world, cloaked in glamour and now laid bare in grim detail. Whatever the truth, it was clear. The whispers had become screams. By now, the courtroom had grown eerily still. Even the sound of pens scratching paper seemed to pause as Keanu Charles, once the man with the calmest demeanor in Hollywood, lowered his voice to a trembling whisper. "I tried to leave," he said, eyes brimming. "I moved my family to a private island off the grid. I changed my numbers, my agents, my lawyers. I severed every tie to the industry, but somehow he always found me." His voice cracked. A hush swept through the gallery as a single tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Instead, he stared forward, his voice steadier now, fueled by something deeper: resolve. "I thought if I disappeared, it would end. But I didn't disappear. I just delayed him." He spoke of years spent in isolation. No premieres, no public sightings, no press. Friends believed he'd gone into early retirement. Fans speculated about a breakdown. But behind the silence was a calculated escape plan from something far more sinister than burnout. "The messages started subtle," Charles continued. "Voicemails without words, just music. Old jazz tracks Diddy used to play during the so-called retreats. Then gifts began to arrive. Random at first, a single glove, a Polaroid of a house I'd never seen, a dog collar with my childhood nickname engraved on it." The gallery shifted in discomfort. One juror glanced at the judge, clearly unsettled, but it was the next part of his testimony that shattered the room's composure. "Then, a box showed up at my door," Charles said. He paused, his jaw tight. Inside was a spoon, just a spoon, covered in dried tomato paste. A wave of gasps rippled through the courtroom. "There was a note," he said. "You're still in it. That's all it said." Judge Subramanian's gaze sharpened, but he let the moment sit. Prosecutor Emily Johnson's pen had frozen midair. Damian Williams clenched his jaw, his eyes darting between Charles and the defense table. At that table, Diddy sat utterly still. No whispering now, no fidgeting. Just a blank stare, his jaw locked, his fingers pressed tightly together in front of him. Charles shook his head slowly. It was never about leaving. It was about whether he would let me go. His voice was thin, almost inaudible. Yet each word hit the courtroom like a gavel strike. This wasn't just the story of escape. It was the haunting reminder that escape, in Diddy's world, might not have ever been an option. As Keanu Charles finished recounting the eerie message sealed with a spoon smeared in dried tomato paste, the courtroom gallery exploded in a cacophony of gasps, whispered exclamations, and stunned murmurs. Cameras clicking from the back of the room punctuated the chaos, capturing every shocked face in high definition. Judge Arun Subramanian slammed his gavel with authority, the sharp clang silencing the uproar immediately. "This is a federal courtroom, not a tabloid sideshow," he barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a whip. "I expect order. Silence, or I will clear the gallery." For a moment, the courtroom was hushed under the weight of the judge's command. Even the media outlets seemed to hold their breath, recognizing the gravity of the moment. At the defense table, Mark Agnifilo rose sharply, his suit jacket creaking as he straightened. "Your Honor," he began, voice measured but firm, "we move for dismissal of this line of testimony. What we are hearing is nothing more than sensationalist fiction designed to provoke outrage and sell headlines. There is no basis in fact, only dramatic storytelling." Tenny Giragos nodded in agreement, adding with a smirk, "This is not testimony, Your Honor. This is screenwriting, a Hollywood thriller with no place in this courtroom." The prosecutor's table buzzed with quiet murmurs of disbelief, but they remained composed. Assistant U.S. Attorney Damian Williams stood, eyes locked on the defense, before turning respectfully toward the bench. "Your Honor, this testimony is central to establishing the psychological manipulation and control allegedly exerted by the defendant. The witness's experiences, no matter how extraordinary, are relevant and credible." Judge Subramanian considered the arguments briefly, his expression unreadable. Then, without missing a beat, he declared, "The witness will continue." The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The judge's decision was firm. The testimony, no matter how outlandish it sounded, was admissible. Diddy's defense team sank back into their seats, exchanging quick, tense whispers. Diddy himself exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples as if trying to dispel the weight of what he had just heard. In the public gallery, whispers resumed, but now laced with a new intensity. What had begun as a courtroom proceeding had morphed into a high-stakes drama with a star-studded cast, dark rituals, and a trial that defied every expectation. Judge Subramanian's gavel rose once more, signaling the return to order and the continuation of a story that would only grow more gripping from here. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted again as Keanu Charles ventured deeper into the shadows that, according to him, lurked beneath Hollywood's glittering facade. His tone grew heavier, eyes darkening with the weight of his revelations. "It wasn't just him," Charles said slowly, locking eyes with the jury one by one. "There were others, actors, producers, executives, people with power, people who operated in plain sight yet were part of something much darker." A collective intake of breath swept through the gallery. The jurors exchanged glances, some visibly startled, others leaning forward with renewed attention. The defense attorneys shot a glare toward Charles, their faces taut with disbelief and rising frustration. Charles hesitated, then added, "Sean Combs was the anchor, the linchpin holding it all together. But he was not alone." He carefully avoided naming any individuals, his silence more powerful than any accusation. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the tension almost palpable. Prosecutor Emily Johnson rose smoothly, addressing Judge Arun Subramanian with measured calm. "Your Honor, the government reserves the right to expand its witness list as this investigation unfolds. We are actively pursuing leads that may further illuminate the scope of this network." The defense table bristled immediately. Mark Agnifilo narrowed his eyes, whispering fiercely to Tenny Garagos. Garagos returned the stare, shaking his head slowly, lips pressed in a thin line. Judge Subramanian tapped his pen on the bench thoughtfully. "This court will consider any new evidence presented in due course. For now, the witness will proceed with his testimony." Assistant U.S. Attorney Damian Williams added, "The government is committed to full transparency with the court and will provide any additional details as they become available." The gallery buzzed with restrained excitement. To the public and press, this was more than a trial. It was an unfolding expose hinting at an elite cabal hidden behind the spotlight. Diddy, seated at the defense table, leaned back slightly, jaw clenched but composed. The weight of Charles's words seemed to press down on him like a physical force. As the proceedings resumed, the notion of a secret Hollywood underworld, anchored by one of its biggest stars, hung heavily in the air, leaving everyone in the courtroom to wonder, just how deep did the rabbit hole go? The courtroom's tension thickened as Mark Agnifilo rose from the defense table, adjusting his tie with a practiced, almost theatrical precision. His voice was sharp but controlled, every word carefully chosen to dismantle the narrative just laid before the court. "Your Honor, we categorically deny this fantastical testimony," Agnifilo began, his gaze sweeping across the jury with quiet confidence. "My client, Sean Combs, is not the cult leader of some Hollywood coven. These allegations are nothing more than wild speculation, designed to inflame the public and tarnish an innocent man's reputation." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. "We will present character witnesses who have known Mr. Combs for decades, men and women of impeccable integrity. We have alibis that disprove the timelines of these so-called rituals. And we possess documentation, including detailed calendars, emails, and video footage that directly contradict the fanciful stories we have heard today." Mark Agnifilo's tone sharpened as he glanced briefly toward Keanu Charles, who sat quietly, the strain of the day etched deeply on his face. Before Agnifilo could resume his seat, Tenny Garagos rose, his expression steely, voice low but resolute. "Let us be clear," Garagos said. "We do not convict based on horror stories or sensationalist tales crafted for shock value. We convict based on facts, evidence, and the rule of law. This courtroom is not a stage for melodrama." He locked eyes with the jury, emphasizing his point with deliberate weight. "The prosecution has yet to produce a shred of concrete proof linking my client to any criminal wrongdoing. Until they do, these allegations remain just that, allegations." Throughout their statements, Sean Combs remained stoic but visibly tense, his jaw clenched tightly, muscles twitching as his gaze darted repeatedly toward Charles. It was a look filled with unspoken challenge, as if daring the witness to maintain his story under the weight of such powerful denial. Judge Arun Subramanian watched the exchange with keen interest, his steely eyes scanning the courtroom before finally nodding slightly, signaling the defense to take their seats. The courtroom murmured softly, the jury seemingly caught in the middle of two worlds. One filled with whispered secrets and ritualistic claims, the other grounded firmly in the pursuit of legal truth. As the proceedings continued, the battle lines were clear, between a tale of darkness and a defense built on fact. The drama was far from over. As Keanu Charles drew his testimony toward a close, the air in the courtroom thickened with a profound gravity. Every eye was fixed on him, every breath held in anticipation of what would come next. This was no longer just testimony, it was a reckoning. "I'm not here for revenge," Charles said, voice steady but layered with raw emotion. "I'm here because I don't want to wake up one more day wondering who's next." His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the jurors, the judge, the packed gallery, faces marked by disbelief, curiosity, and a dawning understanding. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing, "Because if I don't speak now, nobody ever will." The words landed like a hammer blow. A heavy silence descended, filling every corner of the courtroom as if time itself had paused. Even Judge Arun Subramanian, known for his measured composure, leaned back in his chair, momentarily speechless, absorbing the weight of the moment. The gallery was motionless. Journalists, attorneys, and observers alike held their collective breath, the magnitude of Charles's statement reverberating beyond the walls of the courtroom. Assistant U.S. Messler Attorney Emily Johnson exchanged a brief, meaningful glance with Damian Williams, a silent acknowledgement that this testimony was not only pivotal, but deeply human. On the defense side, Mark Agnifalo's jaw tightened, and Tenny Garagos shifted uneasily, aware that despite their vigorous rebuttals, the witness had planted a seed of doubt too potent to ignore. Charles's hands rested lightly on the witness-stand as he gathered himself. "I don't expect to be believed by everyone," he admitted. "But what I do expect is for the truth to be heard, for those who have suffered in silence to finally know they are not alone." The courtroom remained hushed, the gravity of his final confession resonating in the minds of all present. Judge Subramanian tapped his gavel softly, breaking the silence but not the weight of Charles's words. "Thank you, Mr. Charles. Your testimony will be carefully considered." As Charles stepped down, the crowd remained in stunned silence, the echo of his courage lingering long after he left the stand. This was more than a trial. It was a call to confront the shadows lurking behind the glittering facade of fame, and a reminder that sometimes speaking out is the most powerful act of all. As the courtroom emptied, the weight of Keanu Charles's testimony lingered like a storm cloud ready to break. Tomorrow promises an explosive cross-examination, where defense attorneys will aggressively challenge every claim. Behind closed doors, speculation swirls. Will additional celebrities step forward to reveal hidden truths? Will prosecutors expand the case to include conspiracy charges that reach deep into Hollywood's elite? The city and the world waits breathlessly as this high-profile trial unravels, poised to expose secrets that could shake the very foundations of the entertainment industry. The drama is far from over.